The Keltharan exploration fleet drifted like dead whales in the cosmic ocean, their 12 magnificent vessels reduced to silent tombs of metal and dying dreams. Each ship had once been a masterpiece of engineering, their hulls gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that told stories of 1,000 conquered worlds. Now those same patterns flickered weakly, like the last gasps of dying stars. Commander Velthak pressed his 6-fingered hand against the viewport of the flagship, Nexus Prime, watching the universe mock his predicament. Behind him, the bridge. Crew worked frantically at control panels that sparked and hissed with each failing system. The air itself tasted of ozone and desperation. Life support at 30% across the fleet, reported Science Officer Kethmal, her normally melodic voice cracking with strain. The outer rim vessels have maybe 6 hours of breathable atmosphere remaining. Velthak's throat sac pulsed with barely contained rage. 300 years his people had roamed the galaxy, 3 centuries of technological supremacy, of looking down upon lesser species from their position among the stars, and now this, brought low by a gravitational anomaly that their sensors hadn't even detected until it was too late. The exotic matter drives, those crown jewels of Keltharan science, lay dead throughout the fleet. When they had encountered the spatial distortion, the drives hadn't just failed, they had torn themselves apart at the quantum level, taking half the power distribution networks with them. It was like watching gods commit suicide. Commander, Communications Officer Zeftar called out, his usually pristine uniform now stained with coolant fluid from a ruptured conduit. We're detecting approaching vessels. Unknown configuration. Velthak's mandibles clicked with irritation. Pirates? Scavengers? No, sir. They're broadcasting something. Multiple frequencies. It sounds like... Zeftar paused, consulting his instruments with obvious confusion. Like offers of assistance. The main screen flickered to life, showing crude, blocky vessels approaching through the void. Their design was so primitive, it made Velthak's skin crawl. Simple metal tubes, with chemical rockets strapped to their backs like toys built by children. But there were dozens of them, moving in perfect formation with a precision that spoke of military discipline. They're trying to communicate in 17 different languages, Zeftar reported, most of them completely unknown to our databases. But the universal translator is picking up words like help, rescue, and emergency response. Velthak's throat sac inflated with disdain. Tell these, whatever they are, that the Keltharan Empire requires no assistance from primitives. We are a proud people who have sailed between stars since before their species likely discovered fire. The response came back within minutes, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously. The voice was calm, measured, speaking in heavily accented, but understandable Keltharan. Unknown vessels, this is Captain Kim Tae of the Terran Exploration Fleet. We've detected your distress signatures and are moving to provide emergency assistance. Please prepare to receive boarding parties and engineering teams. Terrans, Kethmal whispered. I've heard of them. Young species, barely evolved past planetary warfare. Velthak's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Tell them again. We do not require assistance from beings who still propel themselves with controlled explosions. What happened next defied everything Velthak understood about proper civilized behavior. Instead of withdrawing in shame, the primitive human vessels actually accelerated toward the Keltharan fleet. Their formations tightened, and Velthak could see smaller craft deploying from their crude hulls, shuttles and work pods that moved with surprising grace despite their blocky appearance. They're ignoring our refusal, Zeftar reported, his voice rising an octave. And sir, I'm detecting massive power signatures from their vessels. They're charging what appear to be industrial fabrication systems and portable fusion reactors. Through the viewport, Velthak watched the impossible sight of dozens of human vessels surrounding his dying fleet, like protective shepherds. Their ships were ugly things, no elegant curves or artistic flourishes, just practical angles and efficient design. But they moved with purpose, and there was something deeply unsettling about their determination. Captain Kim Tae is hailing. Curse again, Zeftar announced, The human's voice filled the bridge once more. "Keltharan vessels, we're beginning emergency power transfer procedures. Our engineering teams are standing by with compatible interface units. Please lower your shields to facilitate rescue operations." "Compatible interface units," Kethmal breathed. "How could they possibly have equipment compatible with our technology?" Velthak stared at the approaching human vessels, each one now bristling with mechanical arms and cutting tools, their hulls opening like flowers to reveal cargo bays packed with equipment. These primitives weren't just offering help. They were approaching his technologically superior fleet, as if they actually believed they could provide meaningful assistance. It was either the height of arrogance or something far more dangerous. The confidence of beings who had never learned to accept defeat. Engineer Park High wiped sweat from her forehead as she stared at the impossible task before her. The Aurora's engine room hummed with desperate energy, warning lights painting everything in shades of amber and red. Her hands moved across the control panels like a pianist performing her final concert, each keystroke potentially spelling doom or salvation for 12 dying alien vessels. "Captain, this is completely insane," she muttered into her comm unit, watching power readings spike dangerously as she began the shutdown sequence. "I'm about to tear apart our secondary fusion reactors. If this goes wrong, we'll be floating dead in space right alongside them." Kim Tae's voice crackled back through the static-filled channel, calm as always. "Do it anyway." Park High laughed despite herself. Only humans would risk their own lives for beings who had just insulted them. She grabbed her plasma cutter and began slicing through the reactor housing, sparks flying like angry fireflies around her head. The metal screamed as it gave way, revealing the pulsing heart of the ship's power system. 3 decks above, Medic Lee Bo was having his own impossible conversation with a wounded Keltharan who had been brought aboard during the first rescue shuttle run. The alien was nearly 3 meters tall, with skin that shifted colors like oil on water and eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. Blood that glowed faintly blue seeped from a gash across his torso. "Easy there, big guy," Lebo said softly, his hands moving with practiced precision as he applied pressure to the wound. The alien flinched, clicking his mandibles in what might have been pain or fear. "I know we look different, but hurt is hurt in any language." The Keltharan, Navigator Thexval, according to the crude translation device, stared at Lebo with obvious confusion. His wounds were being treated by a creature he considered barely evolved, yet the human's touch was gentle, professional. Lebo worked around anatomy he didn't understand, using instinct and basic medical principles to stop the bleeding. "Why?" Thexval managed in broken standard, his voice like wind chimes in a storm. "Why help enemy?" Lebo looked up from his work, meeting those ancient alien eyes. "Enemy? You're hurt and far from home. That makes you our responsibility." Across the human fleet, similar scenes played out in defiance of logic and self-preservation. Captain Song Min of the supply vessel Horizon was literally giving away his ship's food stores to alien refugees. His crew didn't question the orders, even though they were now looking at half rations for the next month. "Sir, these protein bars might be toxic to their biology," warned Supply Officer Yoon Da, holding up a standard human nutrition pack. "We have no idea what their digestive systems can handle." Song Min watched through the observation port as Keltharan civilians, refugees from the outer ships where life support had failed completely, huddled together in the cargo bay. Their skin colors shifted with what he was learning indicated emotional states. Right now they were displaying deep purples and grays, fear and confusion. "Then we'll start small and monitor their reactions," Song Min decided. "They're starving, we feed the hungry, it's that simple." Down in Engineering Bay 7 of the Aurora, Park High was elbow deep in alien technology that defied every principle of physics she'd learned. The Keltharan power conduits used some kind of crystalline matrix that channeled energy in ways that should have been impossible. But impossible had never stopped a human engineer before. "Okay, beautiful," she whispered to the alien machinery, running her hands along surfaces that felt warm and almost alive. "Let's see if we can make friends." She jury-rigged a connection using salvaged parts from 3 different human ships, a plasma coupling from a mining vessel, quantum stabilizers from a research craft, and good old-fashioned copper wiring from the Aurora's backup systems. It looked like something a child might build from scrap metal, but when she activated the power flow, the alien systems hummed back to life. Impossible, breathed Keltharan engineer Kolveth, who had been watching the entire procedure. His skin flickered between deep blue amazement and yellow disbelief. Your technology is centuries behind ours. This cannot work. Park High grinned and wiped her greasy hands on her coveralls. Lady, you just met human engineering. We don't care what's impossible. We care what's necessary. The results spoke for themselves. Within hours, life support was returning to the Keltharan vessels. Humans swarmed through alien corridors, patching hull breaches with materials that shouldn't have worked but did anyway. They shared their water, their food, their very breath with beings who had dismissed them as primitives. Commander Velthak stood on his bridge, watching repair crews work through the observation ports. Humans and Keltharans labored side by side, the language barrier overcome by the universal language of emergency response. His throat sac pulsed with emotions he couldn't name. Commander, Science Officer Kethmal reported, her voice filled with disbelief. The humans are actually succeeding. Power levels are climbing across the fleet, but, sir, they're destroying their own ships to save ours. Velthak watched a human engineer literally tear metal paneling from her own vessel to patch a breach in a Keltharan hull. She was smiling as she worked, as if dismantling her own ship was the most natural thing in the galaxy. Why? He whispered, the same question that haunted every Keltharan mind. Why would they sacrifice themselves for us? Keltharan Science Officer Thexvar stood in the center of the makeshift workshop, surrounded by quantum calculators and holographic displays showing impossibly complex mathematical models. His skin had turned a sickly green color, the Keltharan equivalent of pulling an all-nighter while drinking too much coffee. For the past 18 hours, he and his team had been running calculations on their exotic matter drives, and every simulation came back with the same devastating conclusion. The quantum crystalline matrices are completely shattered, he announced to the assembled engineers, both alien and human. To properly synthesize replacement components, we would need a specialized fabrication facility, rare elements found only in 3 known star systems, and approximately 4 months of continuous production time. His team of Keltharan scientists nodded gravely, their skin colors shifting to respectful blues and purples. This was how civilized beings approached problems. With careful analysis, proper procedures, and realistic timelines, they began pulling up star charts, calculating the nearest facility capable of handling such delicate work. Human Chief Engineer Choi Min, meanwhile, was on his hands and knees in the corner of the workshop, literally tearing apart pieces of salvaged machinery with his bare hands. His uniform was covered in grease, coolant fluid, and what looked like alien lubricants that glowed faintly in the dim light. He looked more like a scavenger than an engineer, but his eyes held the focused intensity of a predator on the hunt. "Hey, fancy pants," Choi Min called out to Thexvar without looking up from his work. "What if we don't need perfect matrices? What if we just need something that works?" Thexvar's mandibles clicked with irritation. "Chief Engineer, you clearly don't understand the delicate quantum harmonics involved. The crystalline structure must be precisely aligned to channel exotic matter without creating cascade failures that could tear apart space-time itself." Choi Min finally looked up, a piece of twisted metal in one hand and a plasma torch in the other. "Sounds complicated. Good thing I'm too stupid to know it's impossible." What happened next would be talked about in engineering circles across the galaxy for generations. Choi Min began building something that defied every known law of physics and engineering. He took crystalline fragments from the destroyed Keltharan drives and wrapped them in human-made quantum stabilizers. Then he connected those to salvage power regulators from a mining ship, using copper wire that was probably older than some of the aliens watching. "The harmonic frequencies are completely wrong," protested Junior Engineer Velmos, his skin flashing rapid orange patterns of distress. "Those human components operate on entirely different principles." "Ayep," Choi Min agreed cheerfully, welding 2 pieces together that should have exploded on contact. "That's what makes it interesting." Engineer Park High joined him, bringing an armload of components that looked like they'd been pulled from a dozen different ships. "Found some quantum phase modulators from the research vessel and some old-school magnetic containment units from the cargo haulers. Think we can make them dance together?" "Only one way to find out," Choi Min replied, his grin growing wider. The Keltharans watched in horror as the humans began creating what could only be described as technological heresy. They were mixing technologies that had evolved millions of years apart, using principles that contradicted each other at the fundamental level. Every scientific instinct screamed that this would end in catastrophic failure. Dr. Yoon Soo, the fleet's theoretical physicist, arrived with her arms full of equipment that sparked and hummed with barely contained energy. I brought the quantum flux generators from the Pathfinder and some emergency power cells that are probably not safe for enclosed spaces. Perfect, Choi Min said, accepting a device that was literally too hot to touch without gloves. Safety is for people who have time to do things right. As the humans worked, they did something the Keltharans had never witnessed. They talked through their problems out loud, bouncing ideas off each other like children playing with blocks. There was no hierarchy, no formal procedures, just minds, working together toward a common goal. What if we reverse the polarity on the quantum flow? Suggested Park Hai, holding up a component that pulsed with dangerous energy. That should kill us all, replied Dr. Yoon Soo thoughtfully. But it might work if we buffer it through the magnetic containment system. Let's try it, Choi Min decided, as if discussing weekend plans rather than experimental technology that could tear a hole in reality. 3 days later, the impossible happened. The hybrid drives came online with a sound like singing crystal and roaring thunder. The exotic matter flowed through human-built conduits and Keltharan crystalline matrices, channeled by technologies that had no business working together but somehow did anyway. Commander Velthak stood on his bridge, staring at readings that made no sense. The hybrid drives weren't just working, they were operating at 150% of their original efficiency. His ship was running better than it had when it left the shipyard. How? He whispered, his throat sac pulsing with emotions he couldn't identify. Your mathematics were wrong. Your approach violated fundamental principles. This should not be possible. Choi Min wiped his hands on a rag and shrugged. Yeah, well, impossible things happen when you stop believing they're impossible. Besides, we didn't have 4 months to do it right, so we had to do it fast instead. The truth was starting to dawn on the Keltharans with all the subtlety of a supernova. These humans didn't just ignore limitations, they treated them as suggestions. The joint repair operations had been running for 5 days when the uncomfortable truths began to surface. Commander Velthak found himself spending more time observing the human crews than supervising his own people. What he witnessed challenged everything he thought he knew about civilization, progress, and the natural order of species development. It started with small conversations during shift changes. Navigation Officer Ojin was working alongside Keltharan star mapper Zexloth, updating their charts with human exploration data. The Keltharan was amazed at the scope of human expansion. Dozens of star systems colonized, trade routes established, entire worlds terraformed for habitation. How long has your species been spacefaring? Zexloth asked, his skin displaying curious yellow patterns. Jin looked up from the stellar projections, wiping engine grease from her fingers. Oh, about 90 years or so. My great-grandfather was alive when we launched our first moon colony. The Keltharan's skin went completely white, their equivalent of shock. 90 years? But your expansion data shows settlements reaching the Vega sector. That's impossible for such a young spacefaring species. Jin shrugged as if conquering a quarter of the local galactic arm in less than a century was perfectly normal. We've always been good at spreading out. Had to be, really. Earth threw everything it had at us: ice ages, volcanic winters, plagues, asteroid impacts. Species that couldn't adapt fast died out. Ice ages? Zexaloth's voice cracked with disbelief. Plural? Yeah, we survived 3 major ones that we know of, Jin replied casually, adjusting the star chart coordinates. Probably more before we started keeping good records. Each one lasted thousands of years. Dropped global temperatures by 20 degrees. Froze most of the oceans solid. We learned to survive by being flexible, moving when we had to, adapting our technology to whatever resources we could find. Across the work area, Chief Medical Officer Lee Bo was sharing stories with Keltharan healer Rexsmith while they treated injured crew members from both species. The alien physician was fascinated by human medical techniques, which seemed crude but surprisingly effective. "Your species survived how many global extinction events?" Rexsmith asked, his healing tentacles pausing in their work. "Well, the big ones we know about. The ice ages, the volcanic winter from the Toba eruption, several plague pandemics that killed half our population," Lebo replied, cleaning a wound on a Keltheran engineer. "Then there were the smaller disasters. Wars, famines, natural disasters. We got really good at patching people up with whatever materials we had on hand." Rexsmith's skin flickered with disturbed purple patterns. His own species had evolved on a stable world, with predictable weather patterns and abundant resources. The idea of surviving multiple global catastrophes was beyond his comprehension. "How did your civilization survive such chaos?" he asked. Lebo smiled while applying a bandage made from human medical supplies adapted for alien physiology. "We didn't have a choice, survive or die, so we got creative." The most unsettling revelation came during a joint engineering meeting. Commander Veltak was reviewing the hybrid drive specifications with his senior staff when Engineer Park High mentioned something that made his blood run cold. "This reminds me of the resource wars back on Earth," she said, pointing to a jury-rigged power coupling. "When the rare earth metals started running out, we had to learn to build everything from recycled materials, military equipment, civilian, infrastructure, even our first space stations, all built from whatever we could salvage." "Resource wars?" asked Keltheran engineer Kolveth, his skin displaying confused orange spirals. "Yeah, brutal stuff," Park High continued, apparently unaware of the growing horror on the alien faces around her. "Lasted about 60 years. Most of the planet's advanced materials were either depleted or controlled by hostile factions. So we learned to make fusion reactors from scrap metal, quantum computers from salvaged electronics, and spacecraft from whatever we could find." The Keltharans exchanged glances of barely concealed terror. Their own species had nearly destroyed itself during a single resource conflict that lasted mere months. The idea of maintaining technological advancement during 60 years of global warfare was beyond nightmare. "And during this time you developed faster-than-light travel?" Veltak asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Had to," replied Chief Engineer Choi Min, looking up from his work. "We needed new resources, new worlds to colonize. Staying on one planet was too risky after we'd proven we could nearly wipe ourselves out fighting over rocks and metal. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Communications Officer Yoon Da casually mentioned the Great Engineering Challenge, humanity's response to discovering they weren't alone in the universe. When we first detected alien signals, we realized our technology was probably primitive compared to established galactic civilizations," she explained to the Keltheran communications team. "So we did what humans always do when we're outmatched. We got creative. We took our entire industrial base and retrofitted it for rapid technological advancement. Every factory, every research lab, every university focused on one goal: catch up or get left behind." "In how much time?" asked senior technician Vexqual. "About 20 years, Yoon-Da replied. "We went from primitive radio telescopes to faster-than-light communication, from chemical rockets to exotic matter drives, from planetary civilization to interstellar empire. It was the biggest engineering project in human history." Commander Velthak stood in stunned silence, processing what he'd learned. The Keltharans had spent 3,000 years achieving their current level of technology, building slowly and carefully on the stable foundation of their peaceful world. Humans had accomplished the same thing in decades, forged in the crucible of constant crisis and survival. These weren't primitives who had accidentally stumbled into space. They were survivors who had turned disaster into advantage, who had learned to thrive in conditions that would have destroyed any civilized species. Their technology wasn't crude. It was ruthlessly efficient, designed to work under the worst possible conditions. Most terrifying of all was the realization that humanity's rapid expansion wasn't slowing down. They were just getting started. The Keltheran fleet's departure was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed in recorded history. 12 vessels that had been drifting coffins just weeks earlier now blazed through space with hybrid drives that hummed with impossible efficiency. The ships moved faster than they ever had, their exotic matter engines channeled through human-built systems that defied every known law of physics, yet somehow worked better than the originals. Commander Velthak stood on his bridge watching the sea stars streak past, but his mind wasn't on the journey home. In his personal quarters lay detailed technical specifications, cultural observations, and most importantly, video recordings of everything the humans had accomplished. This data would change everything. The first transmission went out within hours of entering Keltharan space. Priority Alpha channels carried Velthak's report directly to the High Council on Kelthos Prime. Within days, emergency sessions were being called across 3 star systems as leaders struggled to process what they were hearing. "You're telling us," said High Councillor Thexmaran, her ancient voice crackling through the quantum communicator, "that a species barely a century old not only saved our most advanced exploration fleet, but improved our technology beyond our own capabilities." Velthak's skin displayed deep blue patterns of absolute certainty. "Honored Councillor, I have seen things that challenge our fundamental understanding of technological development. These humans don't just solve problems, they redefine what problems actually are." The recordings spoke for themselves. Keltharan engineers watched in stunned silence as human crews accomplished in days what their computer models said would take years. More disturbing were the casual conversations revealing humanity's history, a species that had not just survived multiple extinction events, but had thrived because of them. Within 3 months, the first official Keltharan diplomatic mission launched toward human space. Within 6 months, similar expeditions were departing from the Zephyrian Empire, the Crystalline Confederacy, and even the isolated Void Singers, who rarely communicated with anyone. Dr. Park High found herself suddenly famous across known space when footage of her jury-rigging alien technology went viral on galactic networks. Requests for human engineering consultants flooded in from species who had considered themselves technologically superior just months earlier. "It's incredible," she told her friend Ojin during a brief shore leave on the human colony world of New Sol. "The Zephyrians want us to redesign their entire power grid. The Crystallines are offering to trade 3 star systems for our fabrication techniques. And the Void Singers, nobody even talks to the Void Singers, they sent a formal diplomatic request asking if we could help them solve some engineering problem they've been working on for 3,000 years. Ojin laughed, watching news reports on the holographic display above their table. Alien dignitaries were arriving at Earth daily, their advanced vessels looking strangely primitive next to human ships that had been built in scrapyards and asteroid mining facilities. "Remember when we thought finding alien life would mean we'd finally meet our technological superiors?" Oh, Jin asked. "Turns out the universe was waiting for us to show up and fix everything," Park High replied. The change wasn't just technological. Within a year, the concept of human-style problem-solving had entered the vocabulary of dozens of species. Universities across the galaxy began offering courses in adaptive engineering and crisis-driven innovation. The humans' refusal to accept impossible had become a teachable philosophy. Commander Velthak, now serving as the Keltharan Empire's first ambassador for human relations, often found himself explaining humanity to confused alien audiences. The questions were always the same. How had such a young species advanced so quickly? What was their secret? "They don't have a secret," he would explain to packed auditoriums of alien academics and engineers. "They have a perspective. When we encounter a problem, we calculate the proper solution and implement it correctly. When humans encounter a problem, they ask a different question. Not, what is the right way to solve this, but what are all the possible ways this could be solved?" The implications rippled through galactic civilization like shock waves. Species that had spent millennia perfecting single approaches to technology suddenly found themselves reconsidering everything. Ancient engineering problems that had been marked unsolvable were dusted off and re-examined through human eyes. Captain Kim Tae, now commanding the flagship of humanity's first official exploration fleet, received regular updates on their species' changing status in galactic affairs. Alien governments were practically begging for human advisors. Trade agreements offered ridiculous terms just for access to human engineering teams. During a press conference broadcast across 17 star systems, an alien journalist asked the question everyone wanted answered. Captain Kim, your species, has become the most sought-after problem solvers in known space. How do you explain humanity's unique abilities? Kim Tae smiled with the same calm expression he'd worn when deciding to risk his entire fleet for stranded aliens. We just did what anyone would do. When someone needs help, you help them. When something's broken, you fix it. When someone says, something's impossible, you prove them wrong. The reporter pressed further. But surely there's more to it than that. Your technological innovations, your rapid advancement. Look, Kim Tae interrupted gently. For most of human history, impossible was just another word for we haven't figured it out yet. We've never had the luxury of accepting that something couldn't be done. Survival didn't give us that option. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations were learning what the Keltharans had discovered in that dark void between stars. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons, or their rapidly expanding empire. It was something far more dangerous to the established order, the absolute, stubborn, unshakable belief that there was no such thing as an unsolvable problem. In the depths of space, human ships continued their relentless expansion, carrying with them the most revolutionary concept the galaxy had ever encountered, the idea that impossible was just another challenge waiting to be conquered. The age of human solutions had begun, and the universe would never be the same again. The end.